If I were to tell you that it is self-evident that God does not exist, there would be a lot of people who would have a lot of negative things to say about my claim. That is to say that within logic, which is the way in which we understand the world through simple observation and realization of evidence, denies self-evident propositions. The most common self-evident proposition, which is a form of logical fallacy in most cases, that I've ever seen, and this could be because I spend way too much time debating Christians, is the Bible is true, and it is true because it is self-evidently so. That is, that the Bible, because of its divine nature, and this extends to other religions as well, because other religions make the same claims about their books, in particular Islam and Mormonism, that their books, because of their divine inspiration, are self-evident. That the books themselves, the existence of that dogmatic text, is itself evidence of its own truth. There are problems with this, logically speaking, and this video has been spurred on by a debate that I just had on ICQ chat, literally 10 minutes ago, with a Christian who claimed that the Bible was self-evident. Now, this followed a much longer debate, which raged for about 3 hours, and yes, I do that occasionally. The idea that the Bible evidences itself through its divine nature. The problems are as follows. Number one, you haven't proven that that divinity exists through some sort of logical evidence. Number two, you haven't proven that if that divinity exists, that that specific divinity has any of the characteristics listed within that dogmatic text, again through logical evidence. Number three, it hasn't been logically reasoned that the text itself is accurate, or that all parts of it, because it comes from different sources, are of the same equal grade of divinity. This would be the same for Islam, this would be the same for Mormonism, any of a number of large religions. That is to say that a self-evident proposition is not reasonable. It's not rational, it's not logical. From that, and this person argued, and this is interesting, that the self-evidence of the Bible, because I posed this question to him, I said, if I were to tell you that it is self-evident that Zeus is real, and that all religions outside of Greek Hellenism are in fact heathen, idolatrous cults, and that those adherents will burn in Tartarus for the rest of eternity, what would you say? They responded by claiming that because the Bible is self-evident and is thus the highest form of truth, that my claim cannot possibly be true. Turn it around. I claimed the same thing. And they said I was contradicting myself and using a double standard. Now, I don't understand the reasoning. Again, logically speaking, I don't understand how that's a double standard. If two arguments are posed, dichotomous arguments, like the devil is real, the devil isn't real, because it is an abstract concept, because there is no physical evidence of the existence or non-existence of this being, because there is no real, solid, logically derived evidence of the truth or untruth of the statement, the devil is real, the arguments are essentially equal. They are equally illogical. The idea that anyone would claim self-evidence makes no sense. On its head, it looks like it makes sense. Well, it's divine, therefore it's true. How can you argue against it? You know, your claim is a lie. In one sense, that makes sense, because to people who already agree with that supposition, it will be true. For instance, if I said the sky is blue, I know the sky is blue. I look at it every day. Sometimes it's cloudy and it's white, or, it's dark gray. For the most part, the sky is indeed blue. They likened that argument to their self-evidence hypothesis for the Bible. But I pointed out a difference. I could, given enough time, logically derive from semantic representation, from the actual linguistic term for blue, from the actual recognized, arbitrary, yes, but at least subjectively true, classification of the color blue, that in fact the sky does match that hue. Given enough time, you can do that. But I pointed out, it would not be possible to logically derive, without additional unproven assumptions, that the Bible was self-evident or that it was divine. Because in order for it to be self-evident, it relies on the existence of a divine nature. That is, the Bible is divine, therefore it is self-evident, because of that divinity and because of course, the absolute will of God, which any religion can claim. The problem being, there is no actual logical evidence to suppose that that God is real. So you can follow this argument back. You can't technically negate the self-evidence argument itself. What you can do is undermine the basis upon which that assumption is founded, because it's merely a claim. If I claim that all religions are false and this is self-evident because I scribbled on a napkin and said that all religions are false and that fact is self-evident, and that I was inspired by some cosmic force that all the religions were not true, that is an unevidenced claim that I make. It is exactly the same argument that the biblical people make, that the Christians make when they claim self-evidence for the Bible. The two claims are exactly equal. Both claims have no real logical evidence. Both claims claim that negation is a lie. Both claims claim a sort of absolute value, that is, the highest truth. And both claims negate any other claims to that same self-evidence, because, of course, you're saying God willed it, or the napkin willed it, or whatever you're saying. The two claims are exactly equal. When this occurs, it automatically means that both of the arguments, because there's no actual logical basis for them, are equally false. Or not equally false, but equally unproven. It contains a tautology. The problem being, when you're debating with someone who claims self-evidence, this is something that happens often to me, because many fundamentalist Christians, for some reason, it seems to be getting more popular to claim the self-evidence of the Bible. I never used to hear them claim this. So I don't know whether that's a new phenomenon. It must be similar to claiming that Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship with Jesus. Again, I'll just throw up my hands on that one and ignore it for the moment. This claim, which is now used more and more often, is sort of self-negating when you really think about it. Because it has no logical basis, it can't be rationally derived that it's true or false. It's merely a claim. So when you're debating with someone who uses self-evidence, the easiest way to refute them is just claim the self-evidence of something completely opposite. The two claims become equal, the debate goes nowhere, and it sort of shuts down. However, the fundamentalists normally, and this was, again, the case with this debate, will then quickly say, oh, well, I win, the Bible's self-evident, and it's the highest truth, and your argument can't be true because the Bible is self-evident. And then they usually disconnect because they realize in such a debate, where you're talking about self-evidence claims, there really can be no winner. This might be why it's used by fundamentalists. They try to verbally strut around and make it seem like they've won simply by claiming that they've won or typing faster, when in reality the argument is basically a moot point to begin with, because neither side has any logical, rational evidence that that's not the case. However, I'd point out, while self-evidence claims are themselves equal arguments, the basis upon which they're founded is not necessarily equal. This claim itself is equal, but you've got to get at the root of where that argument comes from to logically debate it. When you point out that there's no logical evidence of a God, but there is logical, rational, established evidence that some of the claims in a text they're claiming as absolute authority are in fact wrong, it undermines their entire argument. For instance, the story in Genesis where they put striped rods before the cows, and the cows come out with streaks on them, and that means that Jacob can have those cows. So thus he multiplies his herd rapidly because he's giving the weak cattle to his neighbor, and he's taking all the strong cattle by making them, streaked. We know that genetics doesn't work that way. It's logical, rational, established genetic law. We know how genetics works, for the most part. We still have a few mysteries to work out, but we know that that's not how reproduction occurs. When you're claiming the self-evidence, and this is a sticky situation, and to any of you fundamentalist Christians out there, be very careful. Here's a little pointer for you. Be very careful about using self-evidence to say the Bible is true. Number one, anyone can equalize your argument simply by claiming self-evidence for anything else they happen to want to claim. Whether it be another religion, the lack of religion, some political claim, something about heterosexuals and homosexuals, gay marriage, feminism, whatever it happens to be, they can just throw it in there, say it's self-evident, and lo and behold, the arguments are equal, nobody wins. The second problem is, because there is no logical, rational basis for that argument, it doesn't hold water anyway. Number three, by claiming an absolute authority level for a religious text, like the Bible or the Quran or whatever, you actually increase the need for a burden of proof for everything within that text. It's one thing to say that a story within the Bible is absolute truth, and you can point to, there are certain stories in the Bible, you can point to archaeological or biological evidence that those things are in fact true. For instance, while we can debate over the exact nature of the Exodus, we do know that the Jews moved through Egypt in captivity at one time. Archaeology suggests that it was over a great deal of time, not all at once. Archaeology also suggests they moved over a land bridge, not over a sea that had been parted, and that the plagues that preceded it never occurred, and that it was multiple tribes, not just the Jews. But at some point, yes, the Jews were in captivity in Egypt and either filtered out or all at once left Egypt. So yes, you can claim truth for simple stories within the Bible. When you claim absolute truth for the entire text, it's problematic, because we can prove that certain parts of the Bible are at best metaphor. They are not to be taken literally. We can also prove that some of the claims in the Bible are in themselves false. It can be proven. For instance, when there are discrepancies between texts as to the nature of an event, as to how many individuals were in war, how many angels were at the sepulchre, how did Judas die, unless you want to drag in a bunch of extra biblical explanations, we can prove that those stories are indeed false. We can prove that one of the accounts of the angels at the sepulchre, at least one, is indeed patently false, because they give discrepancies as to the number of angels present. Therefore, claiming ultimate authority for the Bible is about the worst idea that you can possibly drag into an argument for your religion. It makes much more sense, and here's my parting message to the fundamentalist community. Go back to using emotion in your arguments, saying how lovely Jesus was, or how much joy Christianity brings to the world. Go back to your emotional appeals, which are in themselves logical fallacies, but at the very least are not quite as obvious as the lie of claiming the self-evidence of a religious text which was written over the course of 1,000 years by dozens of different authors, containing multiple discrepancies and contradictions, and which has no logical basis for a claim of self-evidence. Because I can scribble anything that I want to say on a napkin, claim it was divinely inspired, negates your religion entirely, claim self-evidence for it, and my claim is exactly equal to yours. Also, one parting thought, because it's something I need to say. When people tell me I'm going to hell, they feel sorry for me, Jesus is going to shun me, God is angry with me, God have mercy on my soul, I need to confess my sins, so on and so forth. A point I'd like to make. For the same reason that you do not worship or believe in Zeus, and for the same reason you are not terrified of the prospect of spending eternity in Tartarus for not being a Greek Hellenistic pagan, I deny your God, your Savior, and your biblical accounts, and I do not waste any sleep at night worrying about going to hell for the rest of eternity. When you can understand that simple fact, you can liberate yourself from the constant fear-mongering towards me and towards other non-believers. I do not believe in your God, for the same reason you do not believe in Zeus, because to you it is self-evident that Zeus doesn't exist. But to me it's self-evident that your God doesn't exist. There's no rational, logical reasoning behind my decision to deny your God, other than the fact that I understand your scripture has discrepancies in it. I don't have any other logical reasons, and the history of Christianity being violent. I don't have any logical reasons other than emotional appeals, that is, the violence of Christianity, and something arbitrary like denying your texts, to not believe in your God. It's simply, to me, something which I feel is obvious, that I believe, based on the evidence I have seen and based on the way I feel, that your God doesn't exist. Trying to convert me to your religion by claiming I'm going to spend eternity in hell isn't going to work. 100 times out of 100 it will fail, because I know what I believe to be the truth. I don't believe in hell. I don't believe in Jesus. I could point out logical, rational, at least arbitrary and subjective arguments to suggest that Jesus never existed and is based on a Zoroastrian myth. You can't provide any actual evidence, any logically derived evidence, any even subjective evidence that your hell exists, that your God exists. Nor did the Greek Hellenes back in 200 BC, they couldn't prove that Zeus was real. They thought it was self-evident. I can give a billion examples, probably, of reasons why I deny your religion. It's the same reason why I deny Allah, or Elohim from Mormonism, or, the Jehovah's Witnesses account of their world events and their beliefs. I simply don't believe in your God. And also, and I know I'm rambling a little bit here, and I'm sorry for that, one final point, and I promise that's the final point. I do not hate God. I don't hate Jehovah or Jesus any more than I hate Allah or Brahma or Ganesha or Elohim or Zeus or Odin or Satan or any of the other deities that man has worshipped or believed in over time. I don't hate your deity. And you need to understand this. I simply don't believe that your deity exists. I don't believe there's any validity to your claims that your Savior, your so-called Messiah, has any actual meaning, at least to me. I don't believe in your version of the afterlife. So there's really nothing in it for me to join your religion. It has no purpose. It has no reason to exist. And pointing out, of course, what follows that there are thousands of different religions, each claiming absolute inerrant God truth, negating one another. Therefore, by picking your religion, I still have about a 999 out of 1,000 chance of suffering forever, because all the other religions claim that I'd still be a heretic. So if the Muslims are right, you Christians are going to hell. If you Christians are right, they're going to hell. What if Wicca's right? What if some sort of paganism is right? Maybe the Sumerians were right, the Zoroastrians. Maybe the primitive cavemen were right when they first started burying their dead and ingesting hallucinogenic mushrooms. Maybe their fractal, weird, trippy conception of a god was true. Thus, there is nothing to be gained by me converting to your religion. And if you want to convert me, you're going to need a hell of a lot of evidence and a hell of a lot of training in logic and debate, because otherwise I'm going to steamroll you, like I've steamrolled hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of religious people, simply because they don't understand logic and they have no evidence. Peace out.